So our last speaker for today is Dr. Chris Bregler. Chris Bregler is a director and principal scientist at Google AI. He leads teams in misinformation research, media integrity, deep fakes, cheap fakes, and several other areas. Chris received his master's and PhD in computer science from UC Berkeley. He was a professor at NYU and Stanford University and has worked for several companies, including Disney Feature Animation, Facebook's Oculus, New York Times, and many others. His work received numerous awards in various agencies, including NSF, Sloan Foundation, Microsoft, Google, etc. Chris, thanks for joining us today, and please start when you're ready.
Thank you for inviting me. Can you hear me and can you see my slides?
Yes to both.
Okay, great. Yes, so I've been an academic for a long time, 15 years, and then also worked in parallel at the visual effects industry. And then 5 years ago joined Google, and 3 years ago, when deep fakes happened and cheap fakes and many other things, we started a team in research to investigate mitigation techniques. These are research projects, but we're also working with YouTube and with search and with external parties and deploy them in real misinformation scenarios. So I want to start out the term manipulated media in different communities. It's encompassing everything. We focus here, well, at least in this talk, on visual media. And I'm preaching to the choir here. You probably know over 100 years, people were manipulating images. You see here Lincoln with modified pixels. Stalin had a secret lab that was brushing up historic images for propaganda reasons. And you're also all aware that longer than 30 years ago, there is this tool called Photoshop. That was actually a fun fact. It was invented by the Knoll brothers, mainly Thomas Knoll, but John Knoll also contributed and worked at the same time on Star Wars at Lucasfilm. And I actually worked for 7 years in his org. And if you think about visual manipulation, it's something very, very good for Hollywood storytelling. You know it's fake, but you still think it's good. There's also lots of universities and companies, and this is not exhaustive coverage of what's out there, that use manipulated media or synthetic media for social benefits. I personally think there's way more opportunity for social benefits than for misinformation, of course. We'll release this week also some details about a Talking Heads project where we're doing lip sync. Many other people do that. Just imagine like translating into 100 different languages, doing it with like voice cloning and lip modifications and many other things, or teach people how to pronunciate foreign languages and so on. So, but as you also know, there is a very active open source community, a lot of hobbyists that use open source. They implement academics software, and they started late 2017, early 2018. And most recently, you probably have seen Tom Cruise being like deepfaked and doing things that he never said before. And you probably are aware of things like this person does not exist, and disinformation campaigns just download those fake photos and use it in fake profiles. And there's a lot of abuse in unconsensual pornography and many other things. And this is all, the press is very active. Policymakers are very active. The general public is a lot of worried about deepfakes. We do internally, like my main job is to do actually internal detection and many other tools to help YouTube and other platforms that we support at Google. But we also started in 2019 to more publicly interact with the community and help academics. Like there's like two leading academics is at University of Munich and at the University of Naples. Luisa Verdoliva, who is the leading expert in deepfake detection and deepfake, and Matthias Niesner, the same. And so we and others, you probably also know Facebook and Microsoft and many others are having public data sets and detection challenges. We also contributed, we were the first one who made sure that you seek consent from people that you actually want to deepfake. This was not established for some reason before. And but this was late 2019. We also, during that year, supported other academic challenges, like there's an audio deepfakes challenge. That's the so-called automatic speaker verification, spooking, and countermeasures challenge that happens every year. And we believe a platform should just support the academic community. We're not like interested in running our own challenges. But then we also, in 2019, we grouped up with Jigsaw, which is another team at Google. And we aimed to do the full end-to-end, the next step. We also want to figure out how these tools are actually useful for journalists and fact checkers, not just like in an isolation, have people publish papers at computer vision conferences reporting very high accuracy, but then it's never used. And so there we got together with University of Maryland, with Naples again, and with Berkeley, and with Jigsaw and my team, we built a tool that sort of can run these different detectors and can sort of externalize it to, and this was a closed alpha, a whitelisted experiment. There are other companies who built those APIs and user interface and give it out to the world, and everybody can use it. Our opinion is it has disadvantages. It gives adversaries too much information. It gives adversaries the opportunity to reverse engineer those detectors. And also, you might have seen, not in deepfakes, but for example, in deepfakes, they're often there's this new phenomena that we knew about for several years, so-called liar's dividend, that somebody releases a political prisoner or somebody else's video where they say, I'm still alive, or I said this, and then the rest of the community said, this is a deepfake, we cannot believe it. And you also might have seen there were some incidences where then a public detector even detected it's a deepfake with 90% accuracy, and it was actually not true. It was a real video. And so there are all kinds of dangers if you just way too public about those detectors. But the real reason, that the real point I want to make in this talk here is, and I'm preaching to the choir, hopefully, in this community. Deepfakes, yes, they're dangerous. Yes, there's a lot of abuse, but it's also very overhyped. And it takes resources away from other areas. And so especially in the academic community, because now there are all these data sets, it's a sexy thing to do. You train up a detector, you're going to get high precision, but it's on a data set that's really not in the wild. And then cheap fakes where you do doctoring or photoshopping or simple speech changes or other things, they have much higher prevalence. They have been around for much longer time, but not that much academic research is conducted in that area. So it's sort of reverse. And also it's much harder because it's much more general. If you have sort of this person does not exist, it's a specific algorithm, you can get very high precision. But here, the famous Emma Gonzalez case where somebody photoshopped the Constitution and it needs to work in general, they have much lower precision. And so what we ignored, so it's good, more people go into cheap fakes since last year, but we ignored completely the cheapest of manipulated media. When you change context, you show something out of context. Here are some famous examples. One of them is you show during the 2016 election there's ballot staffing in the US, but it really, you show a video from 2012 from Russia, you know, and all you have to do is change the caption or change the meme and put different text. You can do this within seconds. Anybody can do it. You don't need to run an advanced AI algorithm and all that. And there's barely no academic research on how to detect that. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, there are a few papers out there, more and more papers coming out, but this is even more drastic. It's like the highest prevalence, the oldest problem, and nobody works on it, you know? So I'm a little bit saying it very drastically here. So maybe you know some reference and you want to send me. What also, like, I very much enjoy the work from Oxford Reuters Institute, and Rasmus Kleis Nielsen gave a talk earlier, and there's actually another study that is very interesting. Early in the COVID, during COVID, I think in spring last year, made the same conclusion, like checking on fact-checking articles from Claim Review. It opens up, there were no deep fakes, we found. There is some manipulated content, but the highest prevalence, not the highest, one of the highest prevalence is false context. And that's not just images, but lots of other areas. So here's one paper. We're collaborating with Shivanshi Anisha. She's a PhD student at the University of Munich, and Matthias Niesner. Here's one example that is very timely. There is this photo that was taken 2014 of President Obama going to a lab, an NIH lab in Maryland, to learn about the Ebola vaccine. You know, that's sort of the caption. Then it was resurfaced recently that he actually, this is a picture where he and Melinda Gates and Anthony Fauci went to the Wuhan lab to check out the BAT project. And so Shivanshi and colleagues figured out a way, like collecting these images with different captions, that the captions sort of are grounded in that image. You can see Obama, you can see there's a lab. You don't know if it's in Wuhan or in Maryland, but you know when you do a semantic analysis with some AI, these two captions are conflicting. But the algorithm, this is sort of a very smart design. Like, the obvious way is to train an AI algorithm to decide if this is false or true, which I still believe is very dangerous to do, especially if we have false positives, false negatives. But it says, well, these captions clearly represent what's in the image, but they're conflicting. So the claim that this is in Wuhan versus in Maryland is conflicting. So one of them is false, or maybe both are false, but that's all I do. I'm not saying which one is false, or I'm not saying all of that is true. And then the fact checkers get alerted. That's sort of the current proposal. And then with further research, and we also have ideas how to automate it, but we have to be careful to figure out which one is more authoritative. There's a lot of machine learning in that paper. There's a lot of, like, a database was collected. Some fact-checking articles were collected that have so-called ground truth, and I say that in quotation mark. I know many fact-checkers are in this group. And then there's a lot of, like, the main training data set for that is what the algorithm assumes is actually authoritative without any negative side, because it's much, much easier to get large collections of photos with a caption and they're not disputed because you just go to trusted resources. They're like over 200,000 images of training for that, and only a few thousand of sort of assuming false context. But again, the algorithm doesn't make that decision. So it's 2021. We need to have another challenge. We had a challenge in 2019, one in 2020. The new challenge is starting June 21st, if you're interested. Actually, it's a student challenge with ACM, the multimedia systems in Istanbul. And there you can download before the new data set from Shivanshi, and you can start experimenting with it. We, through YouTube, support some prices. And so this is just a shameless plug that we're finally moved on to, like, the most the highest prevalence threats. We can argue if this is the highest prevalence. We also are into studies to do at a larger scale to actually measure the prevalence using fact-checking purposes. And so again, like even with this increased manipulated media detection research, if you detect manipulation, it's very often assumed that if you detect manipulation, it's misinformation. As you know, it's not misinformation most likely. A lot is just satire or entertainment. You always need humans to determine if it's malicious or false. You always rely on fact checkers or content moderators. And so one thing, again, this community, you probably know this workflow in and out. My team is in research, but there's also the News Lab and the Google News Initiative. But the research group also is supporting very much the claim review framework, where you have a markup language. And claim review, many of you use this and surf it. Like if you're like full fact, like Mivan or others, and you have your own sort of side of style, how to publish your fact checks, but then you put this claim review the tags inside, and then the platforms can automatically surf that at the right news feeds in YouTube in certain markets, or in Google search, or Facebook and Twitter and so on. And there is, this is led actually by the Duke Reporters Lab and the international fact-checking community. Also the Washington Post started with this first to define, everybody has their own taxonomy. And this is also an issue right now. And it's actually good that there's no fixed taxonomy for visual media because it's constantly changing. But there is right now an idea to, next to claim review, to also have media review and have sort of more meaningful tags that then have multiple use cases. We also want to push that a little bit into the area where there are like over 100,000 claim review articles. We estimate around 10,000 claim review articles have manipulated media. With manipulated media, I mean also context shifts. And it would be nice to also convert that. And we're working on this right now. We haven't put it out yet, but it's sort of a bigger community effort. It would be nice to push the research community away from like this synthetic generated Photoshop data sets or deepfakes data sets that some group generated to what we actually find in the wild. It's much harder to do. Like it's easy to say than to do, but we sort of want to push, help the community to get closer. There have been all these previous challenges where like people report this high precision and then you run it on in the wild data and it's like random output. So there will be new stuff coming out where we have more realistic data sets on a much wider range of manipulation. And so I like to conclude repeating, like over the last 3 years, the research community made lots of advances in AI-based detection, but it's still very much an arms race. There's no silver bullet. Any detector you build has false positives and false negatives. There's like people have this fantasy, oh yeah, I can have like a Chrome plugin that sort of automatically detects if something is fake and then says it's misinformation. That's never going to work. It will be misinformation inside misinformation. There are lots of new research programs in the US. Actually, it funds also lots of universities in Europe, like the DARPA Semaphore program, which is basic research. But I believe fact checkers cannot be replaced by AI yet. There are subtasks like Mivan talked at Full Fact that you can sort of automatically try to find Was there a previous fact check for that thing, or you can reprioritize. And the last thing I want to make here is, the last point I want to make here is, there's actually a completely different workflow. Right now, we're like all focusing on proving something is false or misleading. But there's another, the other side of the coin is provenance frameworks. And we are supporting provenance. We have reverse image search. All fact checks usually use TinEye or our product or others to find the original image. But there's like other companies and organizations trying to push sort of authenticity frameworks that I want to have sort of a chain of custody, that nothing was modified in this when I surf it, or this came from the Washington Post or from Fox or from somewhere, or this was synthetically generated or Photoshop manipulated, but not for like ill intent. It's just an artist's work. And so this looks like a silver bullet, but I also I have a strong opinion here. It's also not a silver bullet. You can also weaponize that. There could be also another arms race, but it's very interesting and very promising. So I think that's it. It's just, I don't know why, but it's like the cheapest stuff we can't do, and the AI stuff we can detect, and the cheapest stuff that's out there with high frequency nobody's interested in. And this deepfake thing, everybody is following the press and focusing on it. And it would be nice to sort of shift the center of mass closer to where actually things are happening. That's basically it.